Hi everyone. So in today's video, we are going to learn how to call a Apex class from a Lightning Aura component. It's a very basic use case that we'll be solving today. Also, we'll be looking at why sometimes some statements which are written later point of time in the code gets executed first. So this is the agenda, learning how to call an Apex class from Lightning Aura component, passing parameters to the Apex class, receiving the returned value from the Apex class to Lightning component, setting the value of an attribute in the Lightning component and showing it up on the page. Let's begin. So here is my Apex class, and the first method that I have here is called method 1. It is accepting a parameter of string type and it is returning a string type variable because the return type is string. So let's start. First of all, I'll create a Lightning component. Let's call it as Lightning component 1. So here you have different things. Let's say if I want to create a tab out of this Lightning component, then I must check this checkbox called as Lightning tab. Because of this, you will see that in implements, there will be a Lightning implements app hostable. So I'll show you. Just remember that we have checked this checkbox called Lightning tab. Okay, so here it is. Because I checked that tab checkbox, that is why I could see that it is implementing app hostable. For now, let me remove it. I'm just giving a simple message called comp1. Now let me go here and type tab. I'll click on tab and I'll create a new Lightning component tab from here. Right now, I cannot see the component that I've created. The reason being that if I want to show that component or make it available for creating a tab, then I need to add that statement called implements equals app hostable. So let me add it back. Now if I go here and refresh it, I'll be able to find it. I'll name it as LC1 and give a tab style, a random one. Keep the tab on for all the profiles, save it. Okay, so now we have our tab. Let's refresh. Now I'll try opening that tab. We should just be able to see the message comp1. Now the next important thing that you need to understand is when you create a Lightning component, the entire Lightning component bundle gets generated. Now, mostly for handling the logic part and everything, you will be working with the component controller and helper most of the times. You will use the other things as well, but because this is basic, we're just going to cover the component and controller for now. Now, the next thing is adding a simple attribute, okay? So let's say we will call the Apex method and get, like we'll call this method, but it is returning this value, right? Method 1. So when we return that, let's say we want to store it in one of the variables in the Lightning component. So how do you create variables in your Lightning component? Here you could have, the way you create a variable here is string str equals whatever value, right? So similarly, to do this thing in your Lightning component, you have something called as aura attribute. So let me say I create a aura attribute like this. So what do I mean by this? I'm creating a variable in my Lightning Aura component whose name is string var and whose data type is string. This is how you create an attribute. Now the other thing is I want to call this class, right? This Apex class. So what will I do? I'll write a controller over here and then give the name of whichever class that I wish to call. So I'll copy this class and paste it here. Now, the next thing, what I need to do is I need to use a method, right? To be able to call my Apex class. I cannot do it directly from my component. I have to do it from the controller or helper. So let us do that. So I'm making a method currently in my Lightning component, and I can only call a method in the Apex class from a method in the controller or helper. So I'm doing it over here. Now let's look at the step one by one. The first thing that we need to always do is use this statement. Now what am I doing over here is I'm doing a component.get c.method1. Now what do we mean by this? So here we have already declared that the controller is test call class. What does it mean? That whenever we are going to call any method from our controller, it will only find that method in this particular class. The next thing is here, this method one. What is that? This is the method name in that class. So when I say variable action equals to component.get the method name, it means I'm trying to call that method. Now the next step is I want to pass the parameter to that method. So for that, the syntax is set params. What do I mean by that? I am trying to send a parameter to this particular method. Now, what is the syntax for that? This that I'm using, right? This is the variable name or the parameter name in my Apex classes method. So do you see? This is exactly same, and this has to be same, only then it will work. And here, this is any value that I am passing from my Lightning component. Now the next is after we set the parameter, now we will be writing a set callback method. Now, what do we mean by that? It means that we are calling this particular method and we are receiving the response back in this variable. Now, from this variable, we can check what is the state and the return value. So, right now, I'm not checking the state. I'm just taking the return value. Now, for that, the syntax is a dot get return value. A as in whatever is mentioned inside this function, I will use that dot get return value. Now, what does it mean? This return value, which is passed from the Apex to my Lightning component, will be stored over here. And this then I am using over here. Now, what is this? I'll explain you in just a moment. But this is how you're getting the returned value. Now, how is it returning? Because this is the syntax that we have used for it. What am I saying? Set callback. Now, what does it mean? As the name implies, whatever happens, the call goes to the server, goes to the Apex. And once that call happens, it comes back to Lightning component. So after coming back from the Apex, what is it supposed to do? So all the steps that are supposed to happen are mentioned inside these parentheses. Okay, that is it that you need to understand. And then finally, for now, you can ignore this thing. Finally, what we write is $nq.action and this variable. Now, what do I mean by that? Until and unless I do not write the statement, it is not going to go and call the Apex method. Why is it so? Because what does this do is it collects all the methods which are to be called and gathers them in a queue. And at the end of this method, it will go and make a call to the Apex. What does it mean? It makes a call. It actually makes the call. So if you do not write this statement, a call will never go to Apex. Now, like I told you, forget about the statement. Now, so let's say we have two types of value providers in Lightning component. Now, what are value providers? So let's say this is the variable, like I told you, right? The or attribute. If I want to set some value into it, there is a proper syntax that gets followed. How do I set a value into the attribute? I would say component.set and then the attribute name. Now, along with the attribute name, it is always mandatory to write a v dot. So this is nothing but a value provider. So when I use v dot, I'm always going to use an attribute. So I'm saying that in this string var attribute, which I have declared in my component, I am setting the value which I received from my Apex class, right? This is what I've done. Other thing, here also you will notice that I have written method one. That method is of Apex. Now what is C dot? Again, this is a value provider. But the difference is that if you want to reference an attribute of Lightning component, you would use v dot and then the attribute name. But if you're calling a method of Apex class from controller of the Lightning component, then you always have to append a C dot at the beginning. Okay. Now this is also a value provider. C dot means action. Okay. C dot means action and V dot means attribute. Now, when I use a C dot method one, what does it mean? I'm calling a method in my Apex class. Now, when I say Apex class, some people also say it like server-side controller. Okay. Now, why is it so? Because C dot is something that you will use in the controller also, and you will use in the component also. But when you're calling a Apex class from the controller, you will say that you're calling a server-side method. Okay. There is something called as client-side method as well. Now let's take a look at what is it. So let's suppose now I want that as soon as this page initializes, right? As soon as this page gets loaded, I want to display a welcome message, like how ComFun is displayed, right? As soon as I initialize it, I want to dynamically update some value. I want to say that it should say welcome. How can I do that? So first of all, like I told you, in order to reference this, you always use v dot. So let's suppose I want to refer that in my Lightning component. I would again say v dot string var because this is the name. But here in Lightning component, if I use it, not in the controller, I'm saying in the Lightning component, then I have to use an exclamation along with it. And I would say save. And if in the component I'm using it, I do not need to use component.get. That is only if I'm using over here. And now why is it so? Because from component to controller, we are passing these three things: event, component, and helper. That is why I say that component.set and then the variable name. But here I've declared it over here itself, right? So that's why I don't need to do get and set and all that, right? So I directly refer it over here. Okay. Now, like I told, the moment it initializes, the moment we load this page, I want that the method one string that we received from Apex, let's say that I want to display it over here. So not welcome, I would say that method one, I want to display it over here. So how could we do that is, we have something called init. Now what is init? That is an event which gets fired in the backend as soon as we load a Aura page, okay? A Lightning component page. Now, as soon as that event is fired called init, we could perform some action, some customized action. How can we do that? Firing init is not in our hand, but handling it is in our hand. So this handler is something which Salesforce provides by default. Now, what does it do is, if I want to handle the init event, I would call it as name equals to init because this is the event that I want to handle. Value, I would always write exclamation this. And then action is like, again, like I told you, C is also value provider, but because we are in the Lightning component, we always prepend a exclamation, right? So that's why I did a exclamation. But here we wrote V because that was a Aura attribute that we were referring. And here we'll write C is because we are referring to a method, right? Now do init is a method that we created over here, this, right? So we are calling the controller method from the component. Now this is like calling a client side method. Now what is client side and what is server side? If I'm calling any method which is present in this lightning component bundle or even in Aura, that is called a client side controller. But if I'm calling a method which is not present in Aura but in Apex, then that method I call as server side method. So here I'll repeat what I did. As soon as the init will fire, I'm going to handle that and I'm going to call this method. In this method, I have used an action. I'm calling this method. I'm passing this parameter. And as soon as it goes to the apex and comes back, then it performs all these steps. And at the end, like if it had more actions also, we could come here and write $a.enqueue action 1, action 2, and so on. So at the end, it would gather all the actions and execute them at once at the end. That's why we have this statement. So now we have everything in place. Let's refresh. Now you see the moment we loaded it, method 1 showed up, right? Now is the time to find out how the what statement executes in which order. So that's why I've put some console.logs. Now what are console.logs? In Apex class, you have system.debug method to print something. Similarly, we have console.logs which we could use in the controller or helper, and then we could print things. So I have printed 1, 2, 3, and 4 just to show you in what order does it execute. So our output will go something like this. It will first go and execute this part, and then it would not execute this one because like I told you, this only happens once it comes back from the apex. But when will that happen? It will only happen after this statement is run, right? So that is why you will notice that it will not execute this part, and that's why 2 will not execute first, 3 will execute first. So it will be 3, and then it will directly show you 4, because the time it takes to go to the server and come back, in that time, in meanwhile it will display 4. And then at the end, when this gets performed, it goes to the apex and comes back. Then all these actions happen, and that's why the order that you will see would be 1, 3, 4, and 2. So let me show it to you. Now, whatever we have printed in the console.log, how will we see it, right? So we have to go here, right click, and click on inspect. Then click on console. So I cleared the unnecessary things. Just refresh. So here I can see the message 1, 3, 4, 2. 1, 3, 4, and then this executed 2. So I hope you understood it. Thank you.